Coming up in this episode, we are going to talk about how you, the safety pro, can get involved in the hiring process, specifically how to hire people with the right mindset for safety. How do you interview people for that? We're going to talk about some tips. We're going to talk about some specific questions you can ask and what we're really looking for that can give us some sort of indication as to what their outlook, their approach, and support for safety might be. What we want to do is, as best as we possibly can, try to get a sense of how this person may fit in and support what we're after with safety. So that's what we're going to talk about in this episode, how you, the safety pro, can get involved in the hiring process and hire somebody with the right safety mindset. So let's get right into it.
Welcome to the Safety Pro Podcast, powered by iReportSource, helping you manage safety one episode at a time. With the constant regulatory and workplace culture challenges businesses face, we'll provide you with all the relevant information necessary to achieve a safer, more productive workplace. No management theories, platitudes, or guru speak, just actionable info you can use right away. Now here's your host, the Safety Pro himself, Blaine Hoffman.
All right, welcome back. And in this episode, how to hire for a safety mindset. And, when a company's looking to hire their next, whether it's supervisor, manager, maybe it's a safety leader, or just, an average employee that they need to hire through the course of, doing business. Of course, you're going to want to make sure you pick the right person for the job. But hiring, the right person for the job goes beyond just their basic ability to perform the task or their management experience. You want to have someone with the right safety mindset as well, not just technical background and experience. Now, everybody knows the importance that teams play in organizational success. But let's not forget that teams are made up of, that's right, individual players, right? Each one bringing their own strengths and weaknesses and baggage to the team, if you will, right? So I'm going to reference a book that I've talked about before, and I've talked about this author before. I've done other episodes regarding Patrick Lencioni, but The Ideal Team Player, I'm going to have a link in the show notes to the website for the Table Group and Pat's book, but The Ideal Team Player, right? He reveals the 3 indispensable virtues that make some people better team players than others. And, this actually speaks to the mindset we're trying to look for, right? So I would highly recommend you check out that website. Check out the book, as I have, The Ideal Team Player. All right, so according to Pat, what is the ideal team player? There's 3 things. 1, ideal team players are humble. This is a person who lacks excessive ego or concerns about their status. Humble people are quick to point out the contributions of others versus always concerned with being recognized for their contribution. They're slow to seek attention for their own efforts. They share credit. They emphasize team over the self, and they can define success collectively rather than individually. And they also recognize, I should say, and are well aware of their own strengths, and they can easily share those strengths when asked. So they're extremely self-aware. Okay, I'm going to expand on this a little bit. I have seen some posts recently talking about it, how, this whole humble movement is like being humble it can actually hurt your career. And what I loved about The Ideal Team Player is that Pat addresses this indirectly. He doesn't mention that whole movement at all. What I'm saying is those who say, I've seen this on LinkedIn, some articles on LinkedIn about how being humble can hurt you from getting ahead. What people misunderstand about being humble is we're not saying don't speak up, don't, take accolades, don't take credit. What being humble means is just what we explained. You lack excessive ego in general, okay, and aren't concerned about status. You'll thank people and be humble about it. You'll be able to, take somebody's accolades, say, hey, Blaine did a great job on this project. Without him, his leadership, I don't know where we would be. A humble person would say, I really appreciate, thank you for recognizing, my individual contribution. And I, in turn, would like to recognize the team. We all played an integral role, and I would be remiss if I didn't point out Sally, Bob, Jane. And so, that's somebody who's being humble. You could still take credit. The other thing that the articles that talk about how, being humble can be bad for you, they miss these other two aspects of the ideal team player that Pat talks about. And the second one is that ideal team players are hungry, right? They're always looking for more. They're hungry people rarely have to be pushed by a manager or supervisor to work harder because, they are self-motivated and diligent. At the same time, they aren't so hungry that they are entirely consumed by their work. And they're continually thinking about the next steps and the next opportunity. They have just the right amount of drive that you want to see. So that right there is a great, flip side to somebody who's just all humble all the time, right? And you have somebody who also has to be hungry. You can be humble, but you've got to be hungry. So that also blows a hole in this whole theory of, being humble hurts your career. Not really, not if you're the ideal team player. You can have both. Let's add the third piece here, okay? The third piece, ideal team players are smart. I alluded to this when I was talking about being humble. Talked about being extremely self-aware. So what Pat means by smart is that they have common sense about people or a high EQ or emotional quotient, or they're extremely self-aware. Their emotional intelligence is extremely high. So smart team members tend to know what is happening in a group situation and, of course, how to deal with others in the most effective way. They read people. They understand people. And they're able to quickly read the room, read the group, or the dynamics of what's going on at any moment, and they're able to adapt. You may think of them as being tactful or just, like I said, good at dealing with people, but that's something else. They have good judgment, great perception of what's happening, to a group or in a group, and they can apply that intuition well within teams. So the ideal team player is humble, hungry, and smart. The book blows all these out, and trust me, you've got to get the book to get the full context. I'm not certainly doing it justice here. I'm taking sort of at a high level what you want to look for when you interview somebody for the right safety mindset. You can take these three components of an ideal team player and apply them to safety leadership in an organization, okay? So please get the book. No affiliation. I don't have an affiliate link. I don't get anything for referring to this book. I've found value in that book and Pat's work, and that's why I'm sharing it with you, okay? And that's what I do. I take our shared experiences and I share them with others. So look, how can organizational leaders interview for these types of virtues? Let's get into that. First, you've got to ask the right open-ended questions that are designed to get them to share their thoughts and beliefs about, anything really. It could be about leadership, it could be about, scheduling, it could be about customer success. In this case, we're talking about safety. So we want to get into some of these open-ended questions that could give us some feedback as to, what kind of insights they have into safety. Now, don't get me wrong. You do need to find out a little bit more about their professional background as it pertains to, whatever you're hiring them for. But if you're a safety pro and you're asked to sit in on an interview or interview somebody, here's what I would do, okay? So let me back up just one step here. Hiring managers should only be interviewing technically qualified candidates to begin with, right? So you're not going to have to worry about, first, I got to make sure that they're qualified to do their job. Let's assume that any pre-screening process went as designed and that you add some other supervisors or technical subject matter experts or SMEs within the organization already talk to this individual, or they've made it this far, so you don't have to worry so much about that. So you're able to really focus in on sort of this fit, right? Are they going to fit within our organization? Is this somebody who It's going to help us build the culture we're continuously building day in and day out. So here are some questions that you can ask that are designed to determine if they're going to be that asset to the team, right? So 1, how did you get into whatever it is you do? How did you get into this line of work? In safety, I've been asked this, right? How did you get into safety? So the question helps to uncover someone's backstory. It helps them to, share what drives them and motivates them. I don't care what it is. People got into whatever it is they're into for different reasons. But at this point, right, you can start to see if they're even able to articulate the why about their career choice. It can also encourage them to become more comfortable, during the interview. People sometimes, not everybody likes to talk about themselves. Remember, if they're humble, they're gonna have a hard time talking about their own accolades. But humble people would love to talk about the opportunity to serve a greater cause, or to help an organization do better, or to help an industry. Or I really enjoyed, let's say they're an engineer, right? That I really enjoyed growing up, or learning how things worked. I was fascinated, while all my friends just, played with toys. I really wanted to see, how could we make them better and improve them. And, so you can kind of get some insight a little bit in this case. So when I'm asked, how did you get into safety? I have a story I tell, and it's a true story, but it's sort of one that it's my go-to, and it doesn't sound canned because it's authentic. It really happened to me. So I talk about that. And, that's exactly how I got into safety. Is I literally want to help you. I don't think anybody should have to go to work and be injured or get sick as a result of the job they do, just for getting a job. So, you can get some pretty good insights into that one. Another question, number 2, has there ever been a situation or an incident in your work that changed or shifted your approach to the way you work? So are they able to learn from situations? That's what you're trying to uncover. Are they humble enough to take their mistakes and turn them into learning opportunities, right? Instead of blame and point fingers, stuff like that. How have they adapted in the past to improve their life and their work for the better? Again, you get to dig a little deeper. It helps you know a little bit more about how humble someone is and their degree of self-awareness as well. That's important. How about number 3? What is something that you would do to show senior leaders how safety can be a profit center? This is a safety-specific question. If you're, again, hiring for a safety position, this would be a good one. This may not be a question you would ask a non-safety person if you're not hiring for safety, right? You would want to rephrase or use a different question. But I like this one. I've been asked this one before. Look, it helps to indicate a little more about their capacity for critical thinking. I mean, you want somebody to be able to make a connection between what it is they do and other aspects of the business. And in our case, safety pros, right, we're always thinking about this. How can we make that connection between safety and other areas of the business? And can help you know a little bit more about how savvy they are in this area in talking about it. Question 4, here's another one. What would you do if you saw a hazard, or if you saw someone doing something that was unsafe at work? And has this ever happened? And if so, how did you handle it? Was there anything you wish you could have done differently? So some of these sound loaded because, quite obviously, if you asked most people, what would you do if you saw safety? I would tell somebody, I would ask them to stop working. And it's sort of a canned, because nobody's going to be like, I wouldn't do anything, man. It's their choice, That's very rare. First of all, if somebody answered that way, the interview would be over and you got what you needed. But in the second part of this question, I think is important. And that is, has this ever happened? Was it easy for you to say? And you could ask follow-up questions when they're talking about this too. It helps you know a little bit more about how they choose to approach others, right? Especially when the situation is uncomfortable or can involve some conflict. Kind of gets you to the self-aware piece is, how are they able to adapt based on who they're talking to and how they get to know that. Number 5, how do you approach incident investigations? You could ask, how do you approach problems? So you can kind of hide the incident investigation piece. If you are asking a safety-focused candidate, you could say incident investigations. Otherwise, you could just ask, what is your approach to solving problems? Once again, help us frame their motivation and mindset. Helps to know a little bit more about how they deal with others. Of course, are they smart? Their ability to be forward-thinking. That would be hungry. And their degree of self-awareness as it relates to their own ego. And there's humble again, by the way. As you talk to them, do they seek to put blame on people, or do they think in terms of fixing and improving processes? Do they start with what someone did, or what did we miss in this process? Well, both responses are very telling. Okay, so that's a great question. Number 6, what are the most important accomplishments of your career? Now, this is another way of seeing what somebody values. Look for more mentions of we rather than I to see how team-oriented they are. Of course, it isn't about being so simplistic as to count the responses. So in the event that someone refers to themselves individually more than as a member of a team, probe for whether they were working alone or with others, during that aspect of their career. So look, it's subjective, but just having some conversations with folks, you should be able to pick up on some of this stuff. Number 7, what was the most embarrassing moment in your career or your biggest failure? I know this is trite. We get this generic one a lot, but look, be on the lookout for whether they can celebrate that embarrassment or if they're mortified by it. I remember getting asked a question similar to this about, can you give me an example of where you had failed, a mistake that you had made? And I just sat there and I was looking and I was thinking and thinking, and he just looked at me, and his name is Steven. Steve. He just looks at me and I said, look, Steve, I'm not struggling because I haven't made mistakes. I'm trying to pick just one out of the bunch that I can talk about because I know we have limited time. And he kind of chuckled, and I said, look, we all make mistakes. Luckily, mine weren't catastrophic, but mistakes nonetheless. And I learned a lot from them. I don't really view them as mistakes. I view them as, opportunities to learn. I'm like, well, that didn't work. So what did I do? What did I not see? What did I not prepare for or anticipate? And how do I detect that the next time, right? And, he accepted that, which was great. He really liked that answer, but it's the truth. That's why I said it. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for somebody who's like, my biggest failure is I put in 80 hours a week, and sometimes, I should have done 90. It's like, nah, that's humble bragging. That's not the same thing. So, be on the lookout for that as well. Number 8, how did you define success in your career or in your field, whether it's safety, quality, customer success, stuff like that? How would you measure it? And it's another example of critical thinking, right? And can the candidate that you're interviewing define what success looks like? And more importantly, how to achieve that success. So let's put it in safety terms. We know this. How do you define success in safety? If they say, an incident rate that's, below the industry average, it's like, well, you're running by the numbers, right? You're basically saying some level of injury or illness is acceptable. Look, we're humans. The human animal is by design imperfect. We get it. I'm not saying accidents won't happen. What I'm saying is that be careful what you measure success by, because that allows for a certain, amount of acceptance of some injuries and illnesses as, oh, well, it's, statistics. Ask the individuals that got injured if they agree with you, right? I remember doing a keynote, and I got up after the VP had stood up in front of everybody and kicked off the whole workshop. It wasn't a workshop. It was like a safety conference. They had annual safety conference. And the VP of manufacturing was talking about, for the first time, he was celebrating their success, which was great, incremental, as such as it was. Celebrated the success of, for the first time in 5 years, they had reached their goal, their total case incident rate goal, and reduced it by a certain percent and hadn't gone over that, which meant I think the equivalent of like 7 individuals, were injured. There were 7. So that was their goal. Look, I get it, but I wanted to make a point, okay? And I don't want to hear feel the collective eye rolls when I say this out there. And I know some of you are going to ping me on this, warn me that I'm getting into guru territory, but I wanted to make a point. So I got up after him and I said, wow, that's great. That's, you guys should be proud. You got to keep going though, because I have to imagine if I asked those 7 people what they thought, would they clap? And it was sort of dead silence. And I looked over at the VP of manufacturing and I said, so basically we're asking for 6 volunteers this year if we want to continue on this path. We can't tell you how bad it's going to be. We can't tell you the type of injury, and we can't tell you when, but we need 6 of you to step up and volunteer. And so I said, do I have anybody raising your hands? And he looked over and he said, he shook his head and he said he was at a round table there with some other folks, and he turned around over his shoulder to some other people and he just shook his head and said, he's right. Look, it's not about me being right. I wanted to make sure that we got to this point here. How do you define success and safety? We've got to be very careful about that. And we can look for that. We can look for in the interview process how we define success. So if you're looking to hire a supervisor or a manager of a small team, I would put this point blank right to that individual. I'm the safety director, safety manager. And, we're all going to be held accountable for safety performance. So how would you define safety success within your team if you were hired? And see what they say. Number 9, what's the hardest you've ever worked on something in your life? Right? What is the hardest you've ever worked on something in your life? Look for, examples of like real but enjoyable sacrifices, right? I mean, they're not complaining, but they're grateful for the experience. Once again, it helps you to know a little bit more about what they truly value. Like, man, that was rough. It was the roughest 9 weeks of my life. I didn't go out with my friends, and I didn't, and so they don't talk about the success. They don't talk about whether it worked or the project, or they complain about the sacrifice they had to make as a result. So, look, just be on the lookout for that. Use some active listening there. Number 10, have you ever worked with a difficult colleague or boss? How did you handle the situation? Some of these are kind of canned questions, but this one's a good one too. By asking them about a difficult work relationship, you can learn if they can read situations and people and handle them skillfully and navigate that. How did you handle that situation? Look for tangible responses. Again, this is the smart aspect of those 3 things. So remember, we're not talking about intelligence like IQ, like book smart. We're talking people smart. We're talking the ability to not just get along, but actually change your approach and be able to connect with individuals after you've gotten to know them a little bit and quickly read how to approach and talk to somebody to get what you need to get out of them. I don't mean that in a bad way, but if your job is to convince them to work a different way, and you don't want to drop a hammer and say, you will do it this way because that's what we told you, and if you don't, you're going to get fired, and we're going to write you up. Have a nice day and turn around and walk away. How effective do you think that's going to be over time? So we're looking to get this answer to see if they are smart, and it isn't book smart, okay? It's being extremely self-aware and having a high EQ. And again, it's also another chance to see how much hunger they have. It's just, get some insight into their overall ability to fit into your existing culture. But somebody who's hungry will make a determined effort to get through to somebody and to not to win, but to say, hey, look, we have to solve this problem. Help me help you. So it's a combination of being smart, but also they're driven by that being hungry of, we have a problem we have to solve. So I wanted to talk about these 10 questions. I think they're useful. I want to hear, so this is homework for you, all right? This is an interactive episode. I want to hear what questions you've asked or been asked that you thought, Man, that is a really good one. And maybe that stumped you, but there were really smart questions and really made you, open up and show and share a little bit about yourself, or one that really worked on another candidate that you interviewed. So I'm going to post this episode on LinkedIn. So look for my profile, Blaine J. Hoffman, 2 F's, 2 N's, or the Safety Pro podcast page on LinkedIn. I'm going to post about this episode. So I will pose the question in that post. Which ones do you like, or have you used? Which questions? And I want to read your comments, just drop a reply as to which questions you've asked, or what activities you engage in to learn a little bit more about candidates that are interviewing for key positions in your organization, whether they're safety, management, leadership, or anything like that. Keep that in mind. Go to LinkedIn and let's connect there as well. Check out the show notes, right? I used some questions were taken directly from the Ideal Team Player interview guide that Pat has published on his website. And I've got a link to that website as well, thetablegroup.com. And I've also got some information from a blog post. The title is Interview Questions for Safety, which can be found at Tara Carber's post on LinkedIn. I also have a link in the show notes to Tara's post as well. So I found that very interesting, and it was a LinkedIn Pulse article. So again, Interview Questions for Safety by Tara Carber. Watch, it'll be Carbert, Carbert. It's probably just Carbert. I have no idea how to pronounce it, so I apologize in advance. But I came across that article. I want to make sure that I recognize Tara's contribution as well, so I want to give proper attribution and a link to that article. So until the next Safety Pro podcast episode, as always, be safe.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Safety Pro podcast, powered by iReportSource, the all-in-one digital safety solution. For info on how you can request a free demo on all the capabilities of iReportSource to streamline your business's safety management system, head over to thesafetypropodcast.com. We look forward to helping you manage safety on the next episode of the Safety Pro podcast.